It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Paul Janecek. He is a graduate from the in electrical engineering from the West Point in USA, and then he went to UK to get his master's degree in computer science, specializing in human computer interfaces from the Queen Mary and Westfield College. And after that, he went to Switzerland to get his PhD, so he's been traveling quite a lot to complete his education. And then from in Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, he got his PhD in computer science also. Currently, Dr. Paul Janecek is the founder and the CEO of Think Blue Data Private Limited company, which is located in Thailand. And he's also visiting faculty at the Asian Institute of Technology. And his expertise include information visualization, human-computer interaction, HCI, computer graphics, computer user interface, and participatory design. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Paul Janecek.
All right, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and present to the esteemed guests that we have here. So the topic of my discussion today is about data visualization in particular. And there's a very current topic that a lot of people hear about, which is in the area of big data. But I'm going to talk more specifically about the problems of seeing the big picture from getting one data point and then connecting it to the very large amount of data that is available out there. So first of all, I'll give a very brief introduction to the idea of big data, but it's a very popular topic, and I think that many people are familiar with this idea. And then I'm going to talk about a real-world example of connecting a network of data sensors from across the United States and the world. And it's a part of a project that I'm involved in. So big data is often characterized as this boom of data that comes from all these different sources. And it's often, so why is it called big data? It's big because it goes beyond what is typically manageable with modern tools, the tools that most companies have access to. So some examples of this come from like Google. How does Google manage all of the web pages, all the information there? Or Facebook. You know, these are huge data sets that these companies have to manage. So typically, big data is there's this concept of volume and variety and velocity. So volume being that you have very large amount of history of data, massive amounts of data that are taken. There was an example of somebody I was talking in climate studies who was dealing with on the order of 60 terabytes in a month, right? So this is a very significant amount of data that is being collected because these sensors are collecting information relatively continuously, and the limitation becomes on how to manage and then use this vast amount of data. So variety is actually considering about the different types of data. So we have data that is typically in databases, but many of the examples that I've given, like Facebook or Google, it's not really typically database data. This is text or process information. These are different kinds of information which have to be somehow integrated together. And so finding how to integrate and to draw patterns out of that data is part of the problem in this variety area. And velocity is really the real-time side of it. So if you think about the problem of serving the correct ad to somebody who goes to a web page, there's a lot of information that has to be collected, and it has to be able to serve an answer in a very short period of time. So velocity really looks at this large amount of information which is continuously being collected through, for example, web, through emails. But in the area that I work in, it's mostly in sensors. So sensors are collecting data continuously. So this notion of data and how to manage the data and how to make the data usable and actionable so you can make correct decisions is a real challenge, but it's very broadly applicable to many industries. So this is the reason that there's really so much attention to this area. The architectural side, to create software that is able to support this from the smallest level to the interface, which is the area that I'm interested in, is also quite demanding. So on the data production side, you have data which may be new data is added perhaps continuously. And the problem there is that this data has to be integrated. All of your metadata that you have around your history of data has to be updated with this additional information. And the algorithms that are typically used have to take into account that now they're being processed over perhaps databases which are distributed across many different computers. So this architecture is quite a challenge as well. And so a lot of the research has stemmed from some of the original work that was done in Google, but many of these other companies that have also contributed. So Hadoop is an open source software platform which is often is used in approaches for big data. And this particular slide is taken to just to talk about one particular example of a type of big data architecture. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about something that is more concrete. So big data can be perhaps something which is bigger than the biggest thing that you can imagine, right? But let's talk about something which is a little bit more on a realistic scale, where we can understand this as a real project. So the project that I work with, so I have a software company that's here in Thailand, and then I also am part of a software company that's a startup company which is in the U.S. And that company specializes in what is called an environmental sample processor. It's a small robot which detects DNA in the ocean. So the purpose of this robot, how it's typically used, is by researchers or government to identify when there's a hazardous algal bloom. Hazardous algal blooms typically can poison shellfish and aquaculture populations, and can have a huge impact on health as well as commerce because of the loss from the aquaculture. So the sensor that the company in the U.S. creates is this environmental sample processor, which is a in situ sensor, meaning that it collects data out in the ocean, processes it, and then sends back data to the shore continuously. The networked ocean data side is that in the U.S., there's a very large project which is integrating the data that is collected around the oceans across the entire US. And that data is being collected, aggregated, integrated, and served continuously. So this is called the IOOS. And then the data visualization portal is something that we've developed here in Thailand to create a way of integrating the data that's being produced by the sensor in relatively real time with this vast collection of data which already exists, so that people can make actionable decisions based on patterns that they can detect from the environment. And the impact is that for the case of hazardous algal blooms, that you can reduce the detection from about a week, like 6 days. Normally, somebody has to go out into the water, collect a sample, bring it back, test it in a lab, count cells, maybe kill a rat, and then they can then close a beach or something. So what we do is something that can do that just in 3 hours. So the challenge here is it's a kind of a big data challenge. We have a lot of types of information, the variety of information. We have time series data, we have cell concentrations, we have environmental data, we have log files which can be used for the diagnostics about this robot, what's happening, correlating it with events that have occurred. We use images for the DNA. I can explain that a little bit later on. We have volumes, massive volumes of data, the historical data of these sensor network across the entire United States, and being able to serve the appropriate data for particular customers. And we also have the data is real time. We collect the data. Many of these sensors update every 5 to 15 minutes. So we pull in this data and integrate it back into the portal that we serve. This is an overview of this in situ sensing platform, which collects DNA data. So this is showing that basically you have bacteria cells on the top left here. We have an array of one or more of these DNA detection robots that are stationary, typically stationary. And they're drawing in water samples, and then they're basically looking for target organisms to see what is the concentration of these cells in the water. So it detects the DNA, it can detect the toxins that the algae, the algae themselves are not actually poisonous, but sometimes, and it's not exactly clear why and when, sometimes they produce a toxin, and that toxin gets in the shellfish and also can kill fish as well. And it's the toxin that is actually poisonous to humans. And so this array of underwater robots serve data, but the data has to be brought back to the rest of the world, where it can be integrated in with the other data. And so that's a kind of a communication sensor network type problem as well. And then the data is also, it's continuously being developed. So we have this notion on the left. You can see the robot underwater in that kind of harsh environment of the ocean, and that typically you have some number of these sensors which you have to bring the data back in and integrate it with all the other data that's back in the research lab. So part of the challenge is that sensor network problem about how to identify new sensors as they're added to the network to be followed, to integrate that data back in real time, and then to integrate that data not just to the local team's data, the lab's data, but also back to this large network that I mentioned earlier. This is looking at the sensor that I work with, and the company that we work with is usually on a smaller scale, but this type of integrated underwater network is something that is being worked on in a couple areas in the United States right now. So this is called the Ocean Observatory Initiative, which tries to set up a sensor network under the ocean, on the ocean floor, and to hardwire it in using LAN cable, Ethernet, internet cabling. So you have optical cabling to pull the data in continuously directly into the internet. Rather, now everything is being pulled in potentially by more recently it's by cell phone. That's actually quite nice. But before it was by satellite, which is quite expensive and would delay the real-time side. This is the network of data aggregators. These are data stations. These are each point is either a buoy or a platform that is actually collecting data from a range of sensors and then serving that data back to the rest of the network. So there you can see there's across the United States, the U.S.'s integrated ocean observing system is collecting data from over 2,500 different stations, pulling that data together. Most of those are point sources, meaning that it only collects information at a single, like a buoy. And some of those data sources are more something that can look at regions. So it could be satellite, but it's probably more likely that it's something that is able to take perhaps like a wave glide or something that is actually collecting data across space. So some of the challenges that I mentioned here are really part of it is the data capture, but that's more of a the data capture in the sense that we have to, from the point where the data is actually collected in situ, we have to get that data back out, and that's a bit of a challenge in the formatting, the standards that are being used, the way that it's being transferred back into the network, the metadata about it, who's the owner, what were the circumstances of its collection, what is the instrument, which particular model of software was it using. All of this has important effects on the archival and integration with other data sets, and certainly the quality. We know that when a water temperature sensor reads below 0, that probably there's a problem, right? So a lot of data, we see this kind of data all the time. That is data streams which have unusual or probably incorrect data that are just abnormalities, and those have to be taken out as well. Data access is a problem, networking, and then also the security, the ability to control who has access to the data at its source. So, for example, the researchers that we work with in NOAA, the cell concentration sometimes can be hazardous, and because it has an direct impact on closures, which has financial impact, they have to be very careful before they release the most accurate concentration values. So if the public can actually see the data before the scientists have time to verify it, then it can create sort of panic inside of the environment. So they are quite concerned about notions of security. So beyond sensing, there's also the linking of the data. So this is really trying to take that one data point and then assemble it with all the other relevant data points. So these data points are collected across many sensors. So this particular network I mentioned, the IOOS, has 11 regional, it's a network of 11 regional associations that manage data across this U.S. system. So you can see the different regions here. There's one in Alaska, one in the north, central, and southern west coast of the U.S., one for the Pacific Ocean, another on the East Coast. There are 3 of them, north, central, and south. There's another one for the Great Lakes, the large body of fresh water in the northern part of the U.S., the Gulf, and then also in the Caribbean. And each one of these stations is an aggregator. They collect the data from all of the related stations, they integrate it, and they serve it in different formats. They serve it in traditional formats, which are used have been around for decades for sharing environmental data. And they also serve it in formats which are much newer, which are like web service formats that allow the data sources to describe what type of data they have, about the metadata that's available, and what kind of information you can find from even the sensors that data came from. So these 11 different stations that you see here, each one is done quite separately, but they are tied together by a few standards. Those standards are really essential for getting the linking, the integration of these different concepts. This is an example of how they use this integration of these different integration of data from many different repositories through web services to discover what data is available, integrate it into a kind of coherent picture, and then provide it to a client. So you can see the kind of network here, that data sources which come from a number of different data holders that are brought together, some traditional and some using web services, and then provided to the client. A client could be a web browser, a mobile phone even. It could be anything that is providing a data service from all that data. So the emphasis here, this is particularly for hazardous algal blooms, the emphasis here was primarily on modeling. So verifying the correction, the accuracy between the predicted and the actual model for hazardous algal bloom formation. So the problem here with linking, we have standards are extremely important for being able to share and integrate data across sensors being held by different laboratories, for example. They have to label things the same way. They have to put it in a format that can be shared across those different collections. We also have to discover it. These particular IOOS associations allow new sensors to register their data with the regional aggregator so that new sensors, as they come online, can be shared with all the other the data services. Okay, and also the preparation. So these standards, sometimes the older standards are relatively straightforward. The newer standards, which are for the service architectures, tend to be much more complicated for typical scientists to prepare their data in accordance with those standards. So the data preparation becomes a real problem to be able to transform data into something which can be consumed by these different data sources. Okay, then analysis. The robot that we work with uses a type of detection which is actually image-based. So it takes a sample of water, it does a lot of chemical processing on it inside the robot, and in the end, it produces an image which has a grid of points. And each of those points, the brightness of that point corresponds to the concentration of that organism in the water. So if it's looking for a type of hazardous algal bloom organism, like there's heterosigma, for example, then this spot that you see on the top right, each of those dots could indicate an entirely different organism and the concentration of that organism in the water. So what we see on the bottom here is really the process. It's the researcher's workflow, the researcher's process to take that image and turn it into cell concentration. It's actually not, it can be a demanding job. It's a little bit complicated to automate. So we have to take the image, we have to align it, we have to detect the dots, we have to detect the brightness, we have to filter out background noise, we have to then correlate that with, transform it into something which corresponds to the actual brightness, and we have to serve that back to the web. So that, to automate that whole process is what really turns that 6-day work process that was the researcher side into something that can be done really in just a few hours. Most of the data side, the software side, is really quite short, but the collection time, the chemistry side, is a little bit longer. So visualization. So the company that I have here in Thailand focuses on the visualization side. So we do the data analysis and we also do the visualization and providing web-based visualization to the researchers so that they can analyze, they can verify the the accuracy of the automatic data analysis to verify that it's correct. They can visualize that data inside the context of the historical data. They can also do diagnostics, looking at different sides. So each of these visualizations, there are quite a few of them. Each one is quite tailored and it has to be responsive inside of the web environment. Here, the data sets for a single organism are not that great, are not very large. So it's not too challenging to pull the data over. It's more of the analytical side, and then the variety of types of analysis that a researcher might want to do. We also have the portal that is basically integrating that single data point, or the data that's collected from that single sensor, back into the the network, the catalog of all this other IOOS data that's available, the historical data. And that data is quite large, can be extremely large. So that is actually where it's more of a challenge, to try to pre-process that data into something that can be served to the user online in a very responsive way. So we use, from the human-computer interaction side, the research, the interface side, there are tools that are, have been developed for very responsive drill down into data sets and serving this data. And so this is just a snapshot of the data portal, and it's quite interactive. You can to zoom in from the last 24 hours, looking at changes of data every 15 minutes, to back to all the data that's available. In this case, it's showing about 6 months. So being able to move very quickly through all this data set is a challenging side on the architecture to serve visualizations. So we have these large data sets, which, as I mentioned, are distributed across the US through these 11 different open data sets. We have the researchers' data internal locally, and we're pulling all that together. We have the bandwidth constraints to keep something that's quite interactive. And then we have the graphics, the architecture itself on the client side that can serve the interactive graphics. So the example that I just gave is really as mentioned earlier, this end-to-end concept, really from the individual data point that's out there on this remote sensor, and pulling that data all the way back onto somebody's mobile phone, right? So making that transformation of something that is out there, remote, in situ, into something which is actionable, that somebody can say, a government official can say, okay, we need to close the beach, we need to stop harvesting of fish in this area. To be able to make quick decisions is really the impact and the reward of this type of product. So some of the challenges that I mentioned originally on the big data side, we've got variety, the volume, velocity. These are the typical data sets. And inside of each one of those, we have a number of different research problems and technology that we've used to try to address those, but more generally as well. So as I mentioned, the data and metadata standards are real important to set up so that data can be integrated and shared. We have typical service discovery problems, and this isn't... This is more of an application of issues, but there are a lot of in sensor networks. This is still a very dynamic field. We work in process mining to understand potentially what happened to the robot for diagnostics, to understand the sequence of events and where things went wrong, historically. We use dynamic search to drill down, and we have the visualization architecture that is primarily to make this interface responsive. And the applications of this kind of technology research is really certainly in data analysis, but also in process analysis, business intelligence, decision support, monitoring of events. There are many, many different areas where this kind of research and technology can be applied. So Matt is going to follow me, and he'll talk about some of the actual research that's done in CSIM in some of these areas as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and I appreciate. I think we'll have a chance to have questions and stuff later in the panel session. So thank you.